the misconceptions, because I think that's part of the biggest problem with the program, is that people get confused and they think it's something and they think it's something else, and they self-disqualify. So we're going to be talking about misconceptions. We're talking about the difference between tax credit and a grant. We'll be talking about the program criteria, keys to success, eligible projects. We'll give you a few examples. We'll talk a little bit about what approvals look like in this industry, some trends, and some other tactical considerations, and then a little bit about us at the end. So right now I'm getting all sorts of pop-ups that come up and they keep distracting me. I wonder if there's a way I could stop that, but I'll just continue here. There we go. So the SR&ED program, it's the SR&ED Scientific Research and Experimental Development Program. It is the largest and most important corporate tax incentive program in Canada. It's been around for almost 40 years, since the 80s. And it's actually a refund program that's administered through the tax return, and it's administered by CRA. And what you need to do in order to qualify is to identify an advancement of knowledge in a field of science or technology that was achieved through the efforts of a corporation in Canada. So this program is not available to nonprofits, and it's not available to sole proprietors or individuals. It's strictly for corporations and that meet the criteria. And the program criteria, you're going to find out, is quite philosophical. It's very different than a grant in the sense that you have to meet this lofty philosophical description of what is eligible scientifically. And then if you do meet that criteria, then you can move forward with writing off your expenditures. So at least 50% of food and beverage producers that are eligible for this program fail to claim the benefits. These refunds are going to range from $25,000 per year on the very, very, very small side to $125,000 per year, but also for very large producers like, your Pepsis or whatever, it could be in the millions, right? These are real cash refunds, and they're payable to the corporation. A lot of times small business owners get confused about that because we're writing off some expenditures and they think that the refund's going to go to the owner and it goes to the corporation. So here are some of the misconceptions. This program is notorious. Everybody thinks it's a high-tech program. High-tech, IT, math, all of that stuff. And if you go and look at the eligibility list, you'll see it's very broad, and it does include food and beverage sciences. It's on the list, okay? Misconception we hear all the time: oh, I wasn't profitable and this is a tax credit and I didn't pay corporate taxes, I'm not eligible, and then they stop looking at the program. So this is a refundable tax credit, and that's why even if your corporation is at a loss position, you can still get this refund. People think it's like a grant. It's not exactly like a grant. We'll talk about that later. It has some elements that kind of look like a grant because it's a cash refund, but it's very different than a grant, and we have a whole slide on how it's different, so I'll come back to that later. So most businesses rely on their accountant to tell them about things related to their tax return. And a lot of accountants don't recognize eligibility in the food and beverage sector because they think it's a high-tech program. We have the same problem with doctors, and we have the same problem with agriculture, right? So that's why we do these reach outs and these webinars to these other sectors that may not be aware that they're eligible. And then they ask, well, why did my accountant never tell me? Well, your accountant might not know, right, that you were in an eligible category. We see this question all the time: is my work technical or technological? And that's a complicated question. And that's what an analyst at Bond, a dedicated SR&ED analyst, can help you understand whether your work was routine or not routine, and whether it meets the criteria of an advancement of knowledge, and that it is also technological or scientific. And we can help you identify that. And then food products are not eligible. That's just not true. So, if you ever come across an accountant or an advisor who tells you that, they're just wrong. So we'll just put that out there. And I can prove it to you empirically because food science is on the eligibility list that CRA issues. Okay, so misconceptions. It's not a grant. It's actually part of the tax return. And you don't have to be profitable to take advantage of this tax credit program. We also see people who get nervous about this program because it is administered by the government. And so they worry that they're going to get audited, right? And no, this program is separated. It is identified as an incentive program, maybe the only incentive program within CRA, especially for corporations. And it's separated out from CRA so that you don't have to worry about getting a general audit on your corporation just because you fill in an SR&ED tax return. So here's the big difference between a grant and a tax credit. I don't like grants. I don't like grants because they're discretionary. That means somebody gets to say yes or no. These programs come and go. The criteria change all the time. The budget limits change. And if they get denied, there's nothing you can do, right? That's essentially what you're looking at for a grant. But the SR&ED program is a tax credit. It's an entitlement program. The same way if you lost your job, you'd be entitled to EI, and the same way you're entitled to go to the hospital and use your OHIP card because you're entitled. You're entitled to the SR&ED program if you meet the criteria. It's very stable. It's been around for 40 years. It's part of the Income Tax Act. It can only be changed by parliamentary assent. Like literally, the House of Commons would have to convene in order to change this program. That's how secure it is. It's a fixed criteria. They haven't changed in a long time. The interpretations change sometimes, but the criteria has remained stable for a very long time. No budget limit, right? If an extra 30,000 claimants came around next year, CRA would have to pay out that money because it's in the Income Tax Act and you're entitled to it. And there is an appeals process. It's actually a very robust appeals process. And it's one of the things that we do here at Bond, in case there's anyone in the audience who's had a problem with the SR&ED program. There's an appeals process, there's a rebuttal process, an appeals process, and then there's a tax court process. So, I mean, you could go all the way to the Tax Court of Canada in order to change a bad decision. So that's how robust that is. So let's talk a little bit about the program criteria. I always say that there's 3 criteria plus 1. So technological or scientific uncertainty, technological or scientific advancement, systematic investigation, plus content, right? So the 3 criteria are the philosophical concepts. And this is where people run into trouble if they are self-preparers or they try to get their nephew or their accountant to fill out these paperwork because they don't really know what these terms mean. So technological or scientific uncertainty means that there's something uncertain at the scientific level or the technological level that is not known in the public domain at the time of the project and cannot be solved with all the knowledge that is available or routine practices or routine methods or routine engineering. And therefore you must experiment, right? So people misunderstood this all the time, right? Even clients that we've had for 20 years still misunderstand this. That's why they keep hiring us, because it's just too confusing for them to understand what CRA is talking about. But that is generally speaking what the criteria is. Now, if you do conduct due diligence and then your due diligence does not work and then you end up doing experimental work, you should have learned something, right? You should have determined something, and that's your advancement in knowledge in the field of technology or science. And in fact, you could learn something that it doesn't work. Whatever method hypothesis they had, it did not work, right? So, that's an advancement of knowledge too, because you won't do that again, right? That's the learning process too. Systematic investigation basically means, qualified people did qualified work in a systematic way and kept records, and you could keep track of what they did and then learn from it, right? So this program is a rigorous program. It's designed to be performed by qualified individuals and not people just tinkering around in their backyard. That's the third criteria. Now, if CRA does ask you for content, which means records, then you may have to produce a few samples. And we can also help with that at Bond, because a lot of times people get very confused and they think that they have to produce reams and binders of evidence, when in fact, CRA may only need 2 or 3 samples to prove your case. So that's what we do when our audit defense process. So the keys to success in this industry is that CRA does not want to see anything routine. Okay, routine is you got a ketchup with so much sugar and you put less sugar in it. Okay, it's great. It's a new product. It's healthier, but there's nothing uncertain about that. There's no experimentation with that, right? So you need to have projects that go beyond routine, right? Something that's so obvious that anyone in the industry would say, no, that's not experimental. You have to be able to define a technological obstacle or scientific uncertainty. You have to be precise. You have to be precise with this program. Being vague and waving your hands and saying, oh, we experimented and we had hypothesis and it's a new this and that, but you don't say actually what you did, they're going to audit you, right? You have to be scientific, you have to be thorough, you have to be organized. And another key, this is specific to this industry, is that a lot of times CRA will trivialize the work in the food and beverage industry and say, oh, you guys are just mixing and baking and cooking and frying or whatever. And so we have to be able to take whatever work you're doing as a food producer and turn it into food science as opposed to cooking, right? So that's one of the things we can help you with here at Bond if you are working with a professional like us. So here's some eligible projects. Winery, we do a lot of wineries here. Experimentation with fermentation times, yeast. Excellent results are required. Some batches may be low quality or scrapped due to a bad experiment that didn't work out. Brewing protocols, we've done quite a few beer claims. Smokehouse sausages, meats, ethnic taste profiles that you want to kind of meet with available products here in Canada. Sometimes the taste doesn't come right out, the texture or whatever, so you have to experiment. Breads, manufacturing processes that have to be fast and efficient and economical, but still good results. No spoilage, good stable products that don't go moldy. Gluten-free beer, grain that caused manufacturing difficulties, a malt system. I mean, we have so many. Here are some of the approvals that we've had: garlic sauces, cheeses, mead maker, which is one of our interesting ones, which is a liqueur that's made from honey. Cookie making, sausage making. So you can see all the food production is there. So this just is an example that if you had $1 million payroll, you don't have to, and you wrote off 10% of your payroll, and that ended up being $100,000 worth of expenditures that you think went to eligible projects, you get about $65,000 back in Ontario. So that just gives you some idea that's about 65 cents back on the dollar for labor. So best ways to consider eligibility is by comparing what is known at the time, right? And this program is going to award an advancement of knowledge. So it's the knowledge that is the what's going to get you your refund, not the product. And a lot of times people are like, oh, my bread this and my cookie that and this and that. No, but what's the knowledge behind it? That's how you're going to get approved. Was there a risk of failure? When I ask people that, they're like, oh yeah, I guess there wasn't really a risk of failure. Like, I liked my new product, but there wasn't really a risk of failure. We kind of knew it was going to work. Well, that's one of the questions we're going to ask you, right? So if you use the methods that you knew, would those give predictable results? Or when you went and used the methods that were available to you in the industry, did like the thing blow up or turn purple or something unexpected happened and, you know, shriveled up and you couldn't sell it? Like the unpredictable result is what's going to get you your eligibility in this industry. So I always say this, every project can be eligible or ineligible based just on comparing it to the available knowledge at the time of the project, right? You do all the same things. There's a lot of people who do work systematically, but you could be working systematically on a project that's not eligible because all the products are kind of already known in the public domain. So here's some trends. So there's still a lot of companies out there who haven't claimed. 2/3 at least of eligible companies don't claim in general. At least 50% in this industry, could be higher. Lot of denials in the food and beverage sector, a lot. Because maybe they didn't hire consultants or good consultants. Maybe they used an accountant or a friend, and they just didn't understand the philosophy behind the program. And so they failed to make their case, and then CRA came back and said, well, that's just mixing and baking or whatever, and then they get denied, right? So if you've ever had a denial in the past, or you know someone who has, best way to get back into the program is through a consultation with someone like Bond, and maybe prepare better evidence. Maybe you got denied because you didn't have good evidence, and we can help with all of those things. The eligible expenditures are wages, subcontractors. Subcontractors are Canadian subcontractors who work on your behalf, have to be Canadian, they can't be outside of Canada. Materials rendered valueless, any prototype equipment that might be in the food and beverage sector could be eligible, and overhead. So those are the expenditures, and on the wages, I gave you the example that it adds up to about 65 cents back on the dollar. And that's a pretty good refund when you think about it, because you've already spent the money, right? You already did the experimentation. You were going to do it anyway. And now you're going to get 65, 66 cents back on the dollar too. So in Ontario, there are these 3 credits. They're all related. So you do one set of expenditures, and then you get these 3 credits. One is the ITC, one is the OITC, and one is the ORDTC. Now, that sounds complicated, and if you don't really want to understand what's behind that, just hire us, because we take care of all of that for you, right? So we calculate all of this, we do all the forms, we do triple, quadruple quality control check to make sure there's no errors on the forms, and then you get these 3 different credits. These are the forms that we work on. One's called a T661, one's a Schedule 31, OITC, ORDTC. If you're outside of Ontario, there are other forms. There's Schedule 1, there's adjustments, there's the whole tax return, the financial statement. These are the things that we look at, and we make all the necessary adjustments. So the SR&ED claim is part of your tax return, okay? So that's the important thing. When you submit your taxes, these forms already exist. And if you're not claiming SR&ED, they're blank. That's it. And if you work with Bond, or if you decide to get involved in the program, they won't be blank, right? And we can go back, sometimes up to 2 years, and fill in those forms and send in an amendment to your tax return. And we do that on a daily basis. So just a little bit more about the numbers in case anyone's interested. So on the federal side, you're going to get 35%, right? But labor is marked up and subcontractors don't mark down. So we'd encourage you to have more labor and less subcontractors if you want to be involved in the program. And all provincial tax credits, including the OITC, are eligible. Not the ORDTC, it's the only one that's non-refundable. But the OITC is always refundable. So some tactical considerations. You have to be incorporated. Get this question all the time. I'm not incorporated. You can't claim. I'm a sole proprietor. You can't claim. I'm going to be incorporated. You can't claim. Right? So you have to be incorporated, and then this program is retroactive. So after you file your first tax return, you can put in your SR&ED. The T4 is the most generous part of the program, and dividends are not T4, right? So we'll help you understand that. We get a lot of cases where client has been told to pay themselves dividends instead of T4s, and then they get nothing because that whole expense is now ineligible, which is really unfortunate because dividends and T4 income is taxed almost at the same rate. So then if it's SR&ED, it's really unfortunate because you're getting 0 as opposed to 66% back. As part of your corporate tax return, you can go back 2 years, and I'll just explain to you the 18-month filing deadline. If you have a May year end, your 18-month deadline is the following November, not this November, but the next November, right? So, and that May year end covers the expenses from June of the prior year to May 31st of this year. So you have a year in the past, and then you have 18 months that you can file your paperwork after that. That's how it works. So there's a little bit about us. We've been in business for almost 20 years. We have sophisticated management systems, over $100 million in refunds for our clients. We're award-winning, and we have, as far as I can tell, the most testimonials in the industry. You can see them on our website. You can see them on our YouTube and our LinkedIn page. And when you hire Bond, if you do decide to hire a consultant, we have a full team of medical scientists, technologists, engineers, food scientists on staff. And that's a big difference between Bond and other firms. We don't freelance. We don't have anybody who works with us at arm's length. Everybody is here and they use Bond's methodology. And Bond's methodology is very important because it allows us to have the highest possible success rates, as opposed to just hiring some writer. And just to let you know, some firms, even some large accounting firms, they outsource their writing to people who've never met you, and they could be living in another country. So we don't do that. Everybody that works for Bond works here at our offices in Toronto. So I've gone through the presentation in almost 30 minutes, so that's good timing for me. You can contact us on Facebook. We don't use Facebook too much though. LinkedIn or YouTube, or by email. We have a great website, bondconsulting.ca, but we also have another page which is for food. Let me see, where is it here? Yeah, SR&EDfood.ca. That's specific to the SR&ED industry, so you can go and see that there. Now, because you're members of the OFPA, we've created a group code for you, and this is the code. And if you use that code, you'll get a small discount off of your first 3 claims. So that's for a membership benefit that OFPA has generated or negotiated on your behalf. If you want to book a consultation, all you have to do is to go to one of these websites and pick the book a consultation button, and then you'll be connected with one of our talented SR&ED analysts, assessment specialists here. And that's the process. And then from there, we take it from there and we see whether you've done eligible work. So at this point, I can take questions if you like. And do I read the questions, or is someone going to read the questions to me, or what would you like me to do?
I'll read the questions for you,
okay.
Julie. So we actually do have a couple already, so that's great. So the first question is, does AI and robotics qualify under this program? That's a great question.
Yep. Of course it does. It's just not food and science. It's AI and robotics.
Excellent. And another question is, why aren't these programs better known publicly, and how can we spread the news?
Well, I mean, CRA is not going to put out a big flag and send you a message and say that they owe you money, right? It's up to you to figure out that CRA owes you money. It's always been that way. Even if you lose your job, CRA is not going to send you a letter and tell you to apply for your EI, right? So you have to know about these programs. And unfortunately, like I mentioned before, a lot of these programs, this particular program, a lot of people depend on their accountant to tell them. And if they don't know, their own accountant doesn't know. I mean, literally, we have accountants that tell their clients not to file SR&ED. like they've had a bad experience, they didn't know the program very well, and they just, give them really bad advice. So that's one of the reasons as well. And it's all there on the CRA website, but the CRA website is enormous, gigantic. It's got everything from health benefits to death benefits to wills and estates to SR&ED. So if you go there, you'll never figure it out, right? So the only way really to spread the news is like what we're doing here through these outreach and through great partners like the OFPA that help us reach out to the community.
Excellent. That's great. What are some of the main reasons, and I know you touched on this a little bit in your presentation, but could you give a little bit more information about some of the main reasons why people would be, or companies would be denied?
Because they don't know the program well enough and they don't have good representation, right? Just because CRA comes and says your work is not eligible doesn't mean they're right. Okay, CRA makes mistakes on this program all the time. And if you've written up your claim in a way that it doesn't prove eligibility, you have to understand the SR&ED claim is 3 paragraphs, but it's blank. It's not like they tell you how to fill it out. It's just, go ahead, tell us what you did, right? So if you don't know what an advancement of knowledge is, if you don't know what standard practice is, if you don't know what systematic investigation really means, if you don't know what a system uncertainty is, if you don't know these definitions, you're just going to go and say, well, I made a product and I did this and I did that, and it's denied, right? Because especially if you don't have a representative with you. So we have an extremely high accepted as filed rate. At least 95% of our cases don't even get audited. They get accepted as filed. That's because of our narrative, because of the way that we interview the client and write up that description. Now, if you do just write up your claim yourself, your chance of being selected for audit is going to skyrocket. And your chance of being denied is going to skyrocket if you don't have representation. It's like going to court without a lawyer. You just don't want to do it, right? And some of these claims, it's big money. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've seen companies go bankrupt because they were banking on a massive SR&ED claim and it got denied because they had, hired another consultant or they didn't know what they were doing, and the company went under. Like, that's how important this program is, and that's why it's so important to have good representation.
Okay, great, thank you. So another question has come in. Can a company working on a project for preventing infestation of grains using a machine never used in Canada but is imported, does this type of project qualify for SR&ED?
Well, what we would do is we would assign you to an SR&ED assessment specialist who would delve a little bit deeper. That sounds a little bit like like almost sounds like an agricultural sciences project, no? And to see like what is the difference between where this piece of machinery has been used in the past and what's the difference in the Canadian climate, the environment. We look for all the angles that would allow you to make your case that this is uncertain, and there's a good potential. But you should definitely seek out an assessment and see whether we can find an angle to present that under the program. But it's not going to be the piece of equipment that is eligible, just to let you know, because that's another big thing about this program, another major misconception. I bought $1 million piece of equipment and I want to write it off. No, that's not going to be a project. That's a commercial asset. That's not one of the categories of the program. It's going to be all your labor and materials and failed attempts to try to get something to work. That's what's going to be your eligible expense.
Clarification. Any other questions that anybody has? Feel free to either type in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand or unmute yourself, don't be shy. Do see that somebody got 3 dots, somebody's typing something, so we'll just wait patiently for the follow-up question there. So maybe in the meantime, if you could explain the difference between, say, a food and beverage type project versus an agriculture type project, what would be the criteria to make those two different?
Well, that project that you just suggested is a perfect example. So generally speaking, agricultural claims are literally the farmers. There are agronomy, which is soil science, oenology, which is the production of wines or viticulture, and pesticides, recent infestations in certain parts of the country, climate change that is maybe affecting certain crops. We even did a crazy claim recently on chicken animal husbandry. It got accepted as filed. It was a great one. It was about chickens being bullied in the chicken pen, and there was a scientific study about it. Yep. So animal husbandry is a big category for us in the agricultural sector. In the food and beverage production, we're looking at the wineries, the beverages, the packaging, the production of the food so that it doesn't rot or spoil or doesn't have a poor shelf life or last longer or still looks good, or can be produced and still look good now that there's so many different trends and taste preferences. No gluten, no salt, no sugar, no binders, no this, no that. So then what happens to the food? Well, it kind of falls apart. It doesn't look good anymore. So how do you overcome that? That's food science. And you don't want that to be presented to CRA like mixing and baking. So because that's a science, right? So that's the big difference between the food and beverage and the agriculture.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. In the meantime, another question has come in. Would marketing and advertising activities be eligible for inclusion in the SR&ED program?
Oh, that's an easy question. No.
Okay. Easy answer.
This is a science program. All work that is eligible is commensurate with the needs of our hypothesis. It's not a grant. It's not a business program. So you're looking at development of hypothesis, development of experiments, testing, experimentation, prototypes, data collection, data analysis, and a few other categories, engineering and so forth, mathematical, computer programming. But this is a science program, so no marketing.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, any last minute questions? So before we head off, what we do like to do for those of you that have joined us for OFPA webinars before, we like to open up our cameras for those of you that feel comfortable to do that, and we would like to take a screenshot that we can include in our social media. So if everybody doesn't mind just turning their cameras on, I will take a screenshot here. With me. Okay, got it. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Julie, for joining us today. This was really useful. And thank you, everyone else that, we've got one last minute question. We'll answer that since we have time. So does a company that imports fresh produce and distribute without any further processing or developing step in the retail store, is that eligible for this program?
No.
Okay. Okay, so if you do have any more questions for Julie and the team, you know where to contact them. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer any of your questions. And thanks again for everyone for joining us today. And thank you so much, Julie, for sharing your knowledge. This will be available. This recording will be available on our YouTube channel and on our members only part of the website. So please go take a look there. Thank you very much.
Great.
Take care, everyone.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting us. We're happy to do this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.